Welcome to The Kicker. I'm Kyle Pope, editor and publisher of CJR. This week, who is going to pay for journalism? The question has been floating around now for months and years, really, as the for-profit media business continues to shrink, and it's raised questions about what the role of citizens is, what the role of government is, what the role of platforms like Facebook and Twitter is, and it's all been sort of recast again in the last week in light of a report out of the UK called the Karen Cross Review, which looks at this question of the viability of news. So I wanted to think through this and talk through this, and I'm joined this week by Matthew Ingram, who's CJR's chief digital writer. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
What's interesting to me about this report is it does sort of put front and center two things. One, what should we do about Facebook, especially, and how it sort of serves news up to us? And two, what should governments, both in the UK and then by extension in the US, be doing if the viability of news as a profitable venture is in question? Was that part of what you thought was interesting about the report as it was written?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a massive sort of tangle of related questions. I mean, there is no easy answer. I mean, I was talking with Emily Bell from the Tow Center about it on Twitter, and I mean, all there are problematic answers. So, right. If you do nothing, that's a huge problem. If the government funds journalism, that's a huge problem. If Facebook and Google continue to control the bulk of the way journalism pays for itself, that's a huge problem. Trying to determine which is the biggest or which is the worst or which is going to have the best outcome.
It seems like the worst problem is leaving things as they are, right? Because this is not getting better and news outlets are dying by the day.
Right. And so if we do nothing, then that just continues. And so outlets stop publishing, period. Others, cut back. I mean, we've seen even the sort of digital superstars like BuzzFeed that were supposed to be the answer are cutting. And so there's no shining light where we can say, oh, that's the solution. And if we just move towards that, that'll solve all our problems.
Emily and I had a chat on this podcast a few weeks ago, and she's of the view that that journalism and capitalism may not go together. That in fact, for real news that takes digging and time and money, we just may need some other infusion of money from the outside, whether it's from the government, whether it's from taxpayers, or from nonprofits, or from rich people, or something. Was that sort of how the Karen Cross Review came down as well?
If I can summarize a massive report in two sentences, they said this is a huge, huge problem. It's a systemic problem. It's not something that can get a sort of one-time fix. And so how do we structure a solution that can kind of work over time and build sustainability? And their conclusion was effectively the same, I think, as Emily's, that some form of government support is really the only stable option. I mean, you can, obviously rich people can put up money and buy things, and foundations can fund this or that, but those things aren't a kind of systemic solution. They're not going to fund everything, and they're not going to that solution isn't going to exist over time. Billionaires change their minds and so on.
Yeah, and I noticed that you hosted a sort of debate on Galley, which is the CJR engagement app, which we'll talk about more later. But the other point of view, I guess, is what? That like we can talk about this as long as we want, and we can have a lot of interesting philosophical discussions, but it's actually never going to happen. So let's not waste our breath.
So that was kind of Josh Marshall's point from Talking Points memo. Was his initial response was, sure, we can talk about that if you want, but there's zero chance that that's ever going to happen in the U.S. And when he elaborated on that, what he was saying was, it's not only is it probably never going to happen, but it would be really bad if it did happen. And so his argument was kind of taking up time and resources and oxygen discussing this thing is probably not going to help, because we should be working on figuring out real solutions, that this isn't a real solution.
And the core of his view, I mean, we don't want to speak for him, and people can go on Galley and read the exchange, but it's basically like, having government intervention means also some form of government control.
Yeah, and I think that's, anyone who's kind of nervous about government funding, that's what it comes down to, is that there is going to be, entities don't just provide money and there's no strings attached, and certainly government is not known for doing that. So
sort of like, do we want Donald Trump controlling the purse strings of the news media?
Yeah,
no, really. I mean, that's sort of where
exactly.
this goes at some point, right?
And I think so. Emily's response was, in totalitarian regimes or those close to it, there are going to be people controlling the media anyway, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or, Donald Trump by proxy, and so that's kind of going to happen anyway. And so the question of whether government funding is useful or not is to some extent separate from that, which I'm not sure I'm entirely convinced of that. And I guess what we have to think about is, are the strings that government is going to attach to that money worse or better than the strings that rich people attach to their money, or foundations attach to their money, or Facebook and Google attach to their money? I mean, I wrote a whole feature for CJR about funding from Facebook and Google and how problematic that is. And lots of people, I think, are just saying, well, look, they're giving us money to do journalism, so how could that be bad?
Yeah. So where do you fall on the government, no government spectrum question?
I am firmly on the fence.
As a good Canadian, actually.
I mean, I feel the same as Emily in a way. I mean, there are nothing but problematic solutions, and I wish, in an ideal world, we would have enough individuals who wanted to support hard-hitting investigative journalism that everyone could pursue a ProPublica model or a Texas Tribune model or a sort of, single-person investigative journalist funded by Kickstarter model. But I don't. So those things do work, but I'm not convinced that that's a solution to the entire, a systemic solution to the entire problems that journalism is facing. So then if government funding does become a reality, then I guess we have to think about, well, how do we do it? Are there ways to do it that minimize the risk of strings and undue influence?
The Cairncross report was noteworthy because of how much time was put into it, and the language was particularly strong. And we'll get to Facebook in a second, but there was a ring of familiarity to the whole thing, especially on this government question. I mean, it's been bandied around a lot more in Europe than in the U.S., but even here it's been bandied around. Do you have any sense of whether people who don't have jobs that require them to think about this are at all tuned into this question?
So my sense would be no. I don't think it's even like in the top 10 of things that people are worried about.
Mm-hmm.
I think sort of civilians, as I like to call them, non-media types are, they're concerned about...
I call them people with real jobs is what we call them.
They're concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about Trump, maybe. They're concerned about... I don't feel like sort of the sustainability of journalism is something they think about a lot. Which is not surprising. It's it's not something non-journalists probably think about.
I totally agree with you, but I think until that changes, this is gonna be a purely theoretical academic discussion. You know what I mean? I mean, until there's some segment of the population that cares about this, who can then communicate this concern to elected officials or to regulators or to whoever. This isn't going to move anywhere.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And there are not going to be obvious, visible, tangible effects on individuals to the extent that they're going to say, hey, what the hell? I should probably figure out a new funding mechanism for journalism, right? They're not even the effects that we could argue are going to come from the problems that exist. It's going to be difficult for people to tie that to the problem that we're talking about. Like, it's not going to be intuitive for them to say this is a problem that relates to the funding of journalism.
Yeah. So I think probably the most headline grabbing part of this report was its assessment of the role of Facebook and Twitter and Google, but really Facebook. What did you find in all of that, both the way that the issue was framed or in the solutions that was new?
So I didn't actually find a whole lot that was new. These are things that we have been talking about for some time, and it was nice to see it all laid out and to see it sort of expressed in an aggressive way, like this needs to be done and this needs to be done. But it doesn't actually, the solutions sound great. We should have a regulator who decides, or who mediates between publishers and Facebook and Google. That's probably or maybe a good idea, but it's hugely problematic to execute. Who is going to do that? How are you going to convince Google and Facebook to even agree to do it? Are you going to force them by law? Are you going to change the laws? Are you going to institute new laws? What if there's a regulator that somehow manages whether they're publishing or distributing fake news? Are they going to somehow get access to the Facebook algorithm? Are they going to force Facebook to install editors who then decide whether something is true or false?
It's one thing for a UK sort of blue ribbon review, which is what this was, to recommend this sort of thing. Do you see any world in which this could get any traction in the U.S.?
I would have said a flat no a few years ago, but I honestly, I know there are sort of factions within Congress that I think are probably pretty close to recommending this type of thing.
Uh-huh.
I just don't know whether they would be able to get any broad traction. I know that Mark Warner has recommended all sorts of things in white papers and discussion papers that are very similar.
Elizabeth Warren has been outspoken on this stuff.
Yeah, but there's no real sense that they have anyone behind them or that there's any kind of momentum. It feels, and if we aren't there now, like after all the things we've seen related to Facebook's impact on the election and fake news and so on, if there isn't any momentum for that now, what would it take for there to be some?
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the stance of Facebook is to just sort of wait it out. So what does this all add up to in terms of this profession that we're in? There does seem to be this kind of growing consensus that this just isn't going to work, pending some additional injection of money, and the source of that additional injection is not at all clear.
Yeah, and there's a sort of real bifurcation, it seems, of the model where if you're tiny and you can be supported by, a few thousand people, you're probably going to be able to figure out how to make that work. And if you're massive, like the New York Times, and you have this global brand, and then you'll probably be able to figure out how to make that work. But that there's this whole middle section, sort of medium-sized metro papers, and I just don't know what the future of that looks like. Like, you're not big enough to do a New York Times type of thing, but you're not local enough or small enough to survive on pennies from readers. So then what do you do?
So Karen Cross was only one bit of news about journalism and the platforms out of the UK. There was also a parliamentary report that came out that was even more strongly worded, that I think did actually get some people's attention here, calling Facebook digital gangsters. And then I remember I read it this morning. It sort of described Mark Zuckerberg's view towards this. both towards the process and also just towards the problem. And it said he had contempt for offering some kind of solution, right? Was that the context of that?
Yeah, they were very critical in part because he has kind of spurned, the UK government effectively. Like, they keep asking him to come and talk to them and talk to various committees, and he just keeps saying no and sending, subordinates. And so there was.
So what's going to happen? What's going to happen when Zuckerberg shows up, wants to go on vacation, and shows up in the UK? I mean, is he? No, is he like? Is he going to be dragged before Parliament?
So technically, he could be. I mean, technically, so Damien Collins, the guy who ran this parliamentary committee, has effectively said that he feels if Mark Zuckerberg goes to the UK, then he could be compelled by an order in the House of Commons to appear before Parliament.
I love that idea. I love the idea of having Mark sort of in his. He's got one of those like pillow things around his neck from the long flight, because I'm sure he flies coach, and then him sort of dragged right down to Whitehall.
And I mean, this is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Damien Collins is the guy who sent the sergeant at arms to a U.S. businessman's hotel. This is the guy who usually holds the staff or the rod or whatever they call it, and wears a weird uniform. And he went to grab this guy and basically drag him to Parliament,
right,
so that they could seize his emails. So theoretically, it is possible. It would be a pretty big move. Like, that would take some cojones, if you will, to drag the CEO of this giant company into Parliament against his will. But it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, let's hope so. So I mentioned
great TV. Let's put it that way.
I mentioned earlier that a lot of these discussions have been happening on Galley, which is an app for conversations about journalism that we launched a few months ago, and that I think has been doing, and Matthew has been sort of shepherding this and has been doing an amazing job of like bringing in really fascinating people to have these conversations and sort of creating threads for resources for people and for conversations that don't really have a place on places like Twitter, because the format is so short, but also because the climate, it can be nasty and ugly. And so I thought, and I promise this isn't just going to be an infomercial for Galley. I do think there's some interesting stuff that Galley kind of raises. And we're joined by Josh Young. Josh, are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Josh is the technical genius behind Galley, right? Who's been working on this. Galley had a life before it came to CJR as its own standalone app, and then CJR brought it under its wing last year. So talk me through like what you were thinking when you were sort of drawing this thing up.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think that places like Facebook or Twitter have designs that result from business decisions, business strategies that those companies need to make. And that means that the kinds of media and conversations that happen in those places tend to support those business strategies. I look around on the internet and I see all of this amazing software that is helping people connect and talk and accomplish projects together and collaborate, but I don't see software that's specifically designed very well to place journalism at the center of its ability to support and convene really healthy, safe conversation. So I set out to build something that supports that.
Well, and this was all sort of played out hilariously in this conversation that Kara Swisher, who's now at the Times, had with Jack Dorsey at Twitter, in which they were supposed to have a conversation, right, about Twitter. And it ended up being such a shit show, both technically in terms of it was incredibly difficult to follow the thread of the conversation, but also just like people weighing in and sort of coming in and undercutting their argument and sort of trying to get them off on all kinds of random side threads. And I thought it was like it was like a perfect illustration of why this doesn't work if you really want to have a conversation that's not sort of a stream of sort of one-liners.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons Twitter has been successful is that it's really good at forcing the collision of human beings and doing that as much as possible, right? This is what it means to optimize for engagement. And optimizing for engagement is different from optimizing for healthy, productive conversations. So That's exactly what you see.
Right. Well, what stuck out to you in terms of what you've seen of Galley since it's been affiliated with CJR that you've been particularly hopeful about, or that you thought was particularly illuminating?
The story doesn't necessarily have to be about the software. Like, my goal is just to, like, quite literally to support Matthew to have conversations with really interesting people. So I think all the credit goes to Matthew. I mean, his sort of just intuitive ability to find something interesting, whether it's a news article or an emerging conversation on Twitter, put a frame around it on Galley that's conducive to having a healthy conversation about it, attract relevant, important people to joining that conversation, and then kind of manage a little bit of the noise that can creep in, has been just really, really impressive. Like,
I really appreciate your work on this and the work Matthew's done, and I encourage everybody to go to Galley and check it out. Thanks to both of you for being on this week. Next week we begin the rollout of our new print issue, which is looking at how others see journalism. So it's sort of journalism from the outside. It's called the Perception Issue. There's a lot of great stuff in it, and you'll be hearing about it starting next week. That's it for now. Thanks so much.